internet on some of these. All right, sorry about that, TikTok. A little technical issue there. I think we're squared away. All right. Good morning, Freedom Family. How's it going? Good to see everybody. TikTok looks like our technical issue is worked out. All right, all right, all right. Okay, tax exempt generational wealth trusts. Tax exempt. Ooh, it's a beautiful word. All right. So, the generational wealth trust that we utilize here in Kenya, which is our typical generational wealth jurisdiction. It is not our asset planning jurisdiction. All right. So if you tapped into this because you saw the word trust, your focus is asset protection trusts. We do those in different jurisdictions. So feel free to hang out for the conversation. However, some of the things that focus strictly on generational wealth trusts may not apply to an asset protection trust, all right, or any other type of focus on a trust, right? So, like a Medicaid trust and all that stuff. We're not talking about those things today. All right, but asset protection trust, we typically utilize the Kenyan jurisdiction, and the reason why we do that is because of the tax exempt nature of the generational wealth trusts under Kenyan law, which is a beautiful thing for most of our clients. So, what we look at is we look at everything that goes into the trust, everything that was settled into the trust under local law is tax exempt for settlement purposes. All right, so there's no tax settling a thing into the trust. All right, so moving that ownership to the trust ownership is tax exempt. And then coming out of the trust, everything coming out of the trust is tax exempt, capped at 10 million. Okay, after 10 million in local currency, then the things coming out of the trust might be capped. Okay, or might be taxed rather. Okay, we say might because if it's for education, if it's for medical, there's this weird caveat that says if it's for early adulthood housing, right? What is early adulthood housing? It's a whole series in and of itself. But the easiest, way to get into the early adulthood housing is definitely dorm housing while at school and things of that nature, right? Hey, good morning from Nairobi. All right, so for those things, the tax exemption is unlimited. Okay, according to the Income Tax Act of Kenya, the tax exemption is unlimited for those things. So you have a limited tax exemption of 10 million shillings a year. Every year, you get 10 million tax free. And then you have an unlimited exemption of educational use, medical use, early adulthood housing use. Okay, so that's one of the kind of biggest caveats to using the Kenyan jurisdiction for our generational wealth trust funds. Okay, we also use them pretty efficiently and effectively to build out entire platforms for Kenyans in the diaspora who don't want to see their kids be victim of a school tragedy in the United States or a mass, shooting tragedy or something like that in the U.S. They don't want to see that happen, and so they remove their kids from those dangerous situations and send them to high-level boarding schools, international schools here in Kenya. So like the Harvard of high schools, right? So there's the International School of Kenya, right? ISK, there's Alliance Boys, there's all these big top level schools that have, quite frankly, better levels of education than the schools in the United States, where you can live there. And so a lot of people, not just Kenyans in the diaspora, there's actually quite a few folks that are interested in pulling their kids out of the dangerous school systems where they might lose their life in school, like a Sandy Hook type of situation. They might, have an interaction with police on the way home from school and lose their life, on the sidewalk. And so that's enough for them to now take their kids and place them into a much safer educational environment. And so we use an education trust because, again, education is tax exempt, unlimited, right? Under the Income Tax Act of Kenya. So because of that, we create an education trust, and then education trust takes care of their housing, takes care of all their education, in case something happens and there's a medical issue, or even just their standard annual medical checkups and teeth cleanings and dental cleanings and all of that. Medical is unlimited tax exemption, right? So medical, education, early adulthood housing, all unlimited tax exemption under the Income Tax Act of Kenya, right? So, which it's Section 11, 3A. So, because of that, our education trusts are very well suited, and then our concierge service makes sure that there's always someone for the kids to call if anything happened that they feel like is unfair, so on and so forth, right? Don't they have? Some of them do. So if they're Kenyan in the diaspora, some of them do have family in Kenya. However, most Kenyans know that doesn't work, right? So if you're a Kenyan living in the UK, your son is a Brit, your son's a UK citizen, or you're a oh, thank you. You're a Kenyan living in the US, right? Your son is essentially American, okay? Sending your son to the village to carry water buckets on their head because grandma sent them to fetch water is not going to work, right? That's not going to jive with the lifestyle that they've been living previously, right? So this idea that there's a grandmother somewhere, in the middle of Kisii or in the middle of, Meru, or, in the middle of Naivasha somewhere that you send your kid to, and then, they live with grandma in a mud house, and then you send them to Alliance Boys School, it doesn't make sense, right? So what ends up happening is we typically set up that educational trust system. The educational trust takes care of everything. So they either live at the school, or depending on what age group they're in, they might live off campus, and the trust will, again, take care of paying for their housing and take care of all the things they need, the toilet paper, the bed sheets, the laundry, all of that stuff, their school fees, their uniforms, and all of that. And then also make sure that we get them to the airport on time, get them back to their parents for the holidays. There's a really, really big Christmas, New Year's season type holiday that's really long, so they can fly back to wherever and spend a couple months, actually. And there are a couple other larger holidays that are about a month long where they can go home if they wish and then, come back. There are some shorter holidays that are only like a week. So for those holidays, we end up organizing things for those really wards, right? So those wards can go to Deani Beach and hang out for a week and all that stuff. And again, the trust would handle all of that. So those are the two biggest use cases for the Kenyan Generational Wealth Trust that our firm deals with, particularly. The third use case is a runway use case. So if you've ever been in business, you've ever done any kind of business, you know that when you start a new business, you have a runway, right? The runway is how much money you have to keep the business open for X amount of time. So you might have a 3-month runway, right? I can keep this business open for 3 months, whether we make money or not. You might have a 6-month runway. I can keep this business open for 6 months, regardless of what happens. So these runways have to be in place, right? So a lot of times what our clients will do is they will actually do a bond ladder within a trust, and the trust will actually own their Kenyan company. That bond ladder will have coupon payments that pay out every month. All right. So they purchase the bonds in a specific way so that every month they get a coupon payment. and then that coupon payment can then go tax-free to the company as its runway for whatever the 6-month runway that's in place, right? And then if they decide the business isn't working, they roll it up, try something else, and then that coupon payment is still flowing into the trust, and they can let that ride out for a couple years until they want to make another attempt at business, right? Your bonds are going to be, probably 10 years minimum. So once you create that bond ladder, you have 10 years of however much money is coming into that trust every month. Typically, it's like 50,000, right? So you got 50,000 Kenyan shillings a month going into that trust, compounding. And then when you want to use it, you want to go open up a business, whatever, you let the trust own the business, and that becomes your runway. The purpose of that is because anyone who's started a business knows that the business will nickel and dime you for the first year or two, right? Every time there's a little problem, you got to reach in your pocket, pull something out because you're not making money yet, right? So having that bond paying monthly and using that bond money allows you to not interrupt your regular budget for your regular household that has nothing to do with business. It also allows you to very easily separate business funds from personal funds, right, for accounting purposes, right? So those are the 3 use cases. The last one is by far the least because we have the business customers are always exceptional, so there's always less of them. And the first 2 use cases are easily the highest level use cases that we have as a firm, right? So there's your overview on how we use those generational wealth style trusts. Any questions on that? Hey, how's it going, Cyber? Hey, thanks for the share. Good here. Hello, Janet. You are the first comment on the Facebook live stream. Hello, hello, hello. Facebook is normally pretty quiet. What is that? Emroot man? How's it going over there in YouTube world? How are you? All right, looks like we got no questions on that. We can move on. How is it tax exempt? It's tax exempt because the Kenyan Income Tax Act, Section 11, 3A, states that the registered trust is tax exempt in cash distributions to its beneficiaries up to 10 million per year per beneficiary. All right, that's a strategic point in the law, right? So, for example, we'll have clients that are married. Okay, the trustee will be the corporate trust company. All right, that's important, especially if you're American, because if you're American, you get taxed on every damn thing everywhere, right? So if you're American, having a non-grantor trust is very important. So you shouldn't be the trustee. And so you're married. Now, the law says that each beneficiary each year can get a tax-free distribution of 10 million. All right, or up to 10 million. So you don't want just the husband to be the beneficiary, right? If you're planning on doing more than 10 million a year, you want the husband and the wife to be the beneficiary, so that the husband can get 10 million tax-free and the wife can get 10 million tax-free. Right? If children show up, you then make those children beneficiaries as well. So if there's 5 beneficiaries under the current law, that's 50 million Kenyan shillings tax-free per year that can be distributed to them, all right, through that trust. So the trust should be handling all those investments. So by statute, a Kenyan generational wealth trust is almost a family office by statute. right? So you get those benefits of having a family office before you've even built one. All right. That's why it's such a great jurisdiction for this specific type of trust. There are other jurisdictions that are better at other type of trust things, right? But for this specific type of trust, it's one of the best jurisdictions because of that tax-free aspect, right? So that's why. All right, that's the answer to your question there. All right, so Section 11.3a is the law that provides for that, and that's how the law reads. Now, you have an unlimited tax exemption for education. So any education distributions are unlimited tax-free. Medical, so any kind of medical, distributions are unlimited tax-free. And early adulthood housing, right? Which absolutely aligns with a kid that's at a boarding school, and even not a kid, because beneficiaries aren't about age, right? It's just about being a beneficiary. So even not a kid who is in college and is living even off-campus housing, right? That's still early adult housing, and it's tied to education. So it's absolutely tax exempt, unlimited. So you have all of those things, which are unlimited exemptions, and an additional 10 million of just cash that you can just pop out to any beneficiary that's also tax exempt, right? How do you get that money in there? Well, there's plenty of ways to do that. So you're going to choose whatever way works for you. But for us, we like bond laddering, right? So especially right now, while the bond rates are 15, 16, 17, even sometimes 18% here in Kenya. Now, last year, no bonds were actually opened, right? We did bond ladders last year, right? So we're not saying bonds weren't available. What we're saying is no new bond was actually opened last year. Every single bond auction last year was a reopen of a previous bond, right? So there were no new bonds last year. Okay, we'll see what happens in 2026. But last year, every single bond auction was a reopen, right? So we're still getting those good interest rates on the bonds. So typically we do a bond ladder. Our bond ladders, if you think that you're familiar with a bond ladder, you may not know what I'm talking about. A lot of places, especially like in the US, when you do a bond ladder, you do a maturity ladder. So you stack the maturities of the bonds that you're buying. That is not what we're doing. We are not doing a bond ladder that stacks maturity. We are doing a bond ladder that stacks coupon payments, right? So our ladder, all the rungs in our ladder are coupon payments, not maturities. Okay, so it's a different bond ladder. So our bond ladder doesn't result in, okay, we're going to get one bond to come mature in 2025 and then the next one in 2026 and then the next. That's not what we're doing. Our bond ladder is we're going to get the bonds to end up paying a monthly cash flow so that the coupon payment is monthly. Every month there's a coupon payment, right? So it's not a maturity ladder, it's a coupon ladder. All right. Kenyan bonds pay out twice a year, 6 months apart. So our ladders are always 6 rungs long, right? And they're strategically designed so that, the first rung pays out in January and July. The second rung pays out in February and August. And that's what the ladder is about. So that with those 6 bonds, you get 12 payments, right? So 12 payments out of 6 bonds. And there's a coupon payment every single month. So you have monthly cash flow that's predictable. That's what our bond ladders are for. All right. Yes, Libra, coupon payments. Yep. So that is what our bond ladders are for. So if you've heard bond ladder before, you might not be thinking about what we're talking about, because typically those ladders are maturity ladders, where people are like, okay, I'm going to get a bond that matures in a year, and then 2 years, and then 3 years, and then 4 years, and then, right? And then they're laddering their maturities. Okay, that's a different strategy, all right? And it doesn't really help our clients, because our clients need cash flow. They need money to come in every month, okay? Because of that, that monthly income can compound, right? So that monthly income can now compound by being reinvested into special funds, or the hot button right now, because they're coming back with about anywhere actually between 20% and 60% ROI. There's two of them that have hit that higher number, which is incredible. But that allows compounding to happen within the generational wealth trust. And that's how the generational wealth trust grows, right? So we have, for example, some clients that have done their generational wealth trust about 4 or 5 years ago. They're set, 4 years ago actually, they're set to be at 3.2 million US dollars in their generational wealth trust in the next 11 years, right? As long as they keep compounding the way they're compounding now, they're projected to be at 3.2 million in the next 11 years. So 15 years after they've started compounding, they started with $12,500, right? So they put in more than the average. That's not the average, right? They put in more than the average, but they had a goal in mind and they had a time frame in mind because their child was already alive and they wanted a significant amount of money in that trust. So they have a 100% drip. 100% drip means that 100% of their coupon payments are reinvested and they're diversified across multiple investments. So they're very aggressively attacking this, right? A lot of folks won't do 100% drip. They'll keep some of that money for cash on hand, almost to create like an emergency fund, right? So they might do an 80% drip. The lowest that we've seen from a client is a 50% drip, right? They'll take 50% of the coupon payment. So if it's 50,000 shillings a month, they're going to take like 25,000 and reinvest, right? And so it's just up to you and how you want to operate that. But compounding will always win. So the compounding is where that money comes from. So imagine if they're going to have $3.2 million, right? Now we're talking about them having, over 300 million shillings, right? And what's the cap? 10 million in cash payments. Unlimited in education, but 10 million in cash payments, right? So as far as distributions that are tax-free are concerned, you can distribute all 300 million if you want, but now you're going to pay taxes on 290, right? If there's only one beneficiary. But 10 million per year per beneficiary, right? So if there's 10 people in your family and all 10 of them are beneficiaries, that's 100 million tax-free in cash per year. 10 million per beneficiary, tax-free. So that's where the money comes from, right? Comes from compounding of some sort. The case study that I gave you is just how we compound, right? We start with a basis of treasury bonds because they're stable, right? And then we get out into the riskier stuff, right? So you can do it any way. There are some people who did it through companies. Now, typically, just for transparency purposes, right? Typically, those people kind of knew what they were doing, right? The folks that did it through companies had companies that were successful and then deeded those companies into the trust. So they already kind of knew, like, hey, my company makes $1 million US a year. Obviously, we're not the US, the total money it makes a year is not going into the trust, even if the trust owns it, right? But out of that, if the trust holds the membership units, if it's an LLC or if it's a corporation, the trust owns the stocks, then the trust is going to get, I don't know, 150, 200,000 a year in distributions, right? And then the rest is going to be reinvested in the company and do whatever it's supposed to do and pay down debt and all of that stuff. So, all right, fine. So if you already know that, then okay, you can put that into the trust to protect the company, right? Because typically the owner of the company is the weak link. Right? What does that mean? That means that even though you're thinking about your limited liability and you're like, oh, I don't mix my money and I don't do any of those things, and so my limited liability is intact, I haven't pierced the corporate veil, that's great. Who owns the share? Who owns the membership units? Right? Who owns the equity of the company? You do. So what happens when you get into a car accident and your insurance doesn't cover the damages? What do you own that can be taken from you by the judge? The shares of the company. So you're the weak link. You're the vulnerability of the company, right? So that's why folks that are savvy make sure that their ownership in the company eventually gets sent over to a trust at some point, right? So that if you slide on ice, right, doesn't necessarily have to be your fault, at least actively, right? You slide on frozen ice in Seattle somewhere, and your car slams into the car ahead of you, right? Causes catastrophic damage. It's your fault, right? Even though you didn't actively mean to do it, you're going to lose that lawsuit. Now, what do you have that they can take from you? Right? That's the way the game works, right? So you're the weak link as far as the limited liability of the company. There's no limited liability from you, from your equity stake in the company. So that gets pushed into trust quite often. And then those companies can, finance the trust, and then that process of the money in the trust growing over time is now accelerated. So the compounding effect of the money that's being invested is accelerated every time you add money to it. Okay. The trick is you don't want the addition of the money coming from outside of the trust or the jurisdiction, essentially, right? So if you can have the bond ladder from inside the jurisdiction making the payments, it doesn't upset your ability to have that trust be non-grantor, which really, really matters to Americans, right? For other countries, it might not matter as much depending on where you live, right? But it really, really matters to Americans that that trust remains non-grantor, because the instant that trust, because it becomes a grantor trust, you have about 5 or 6 IRS filings that you have to make annually on that trust. It's a pain in the ass. If the trust remains non-grantor, you have 0 filings that you have to make to the government by law, and it's definitely not a pain in the ass. So now there are some people, they already have grantor trust, they're already making those filings. It's not an added weight on them to add another trust to that per se. And so we do have clients that are in the know and then knowingly create a grantor trust and then make all these horrific filings to the U.S. government, and end up maybe even having taxable situations with that. And that's fine. It's legal. It's the law. You're doing it the legal way if you need to do it that way, right? But most 90% of our clients, even more than that, 95% that are American, have non-grantor trusts. All right, legitimately, not pretending it's non-grantor and they're actually, breaking the law. The trust is legitimately non-grantor. All right, so that's important. If you're going to do any kind of offshore trust and you're an American, you need to understand the difference between that. The way you do that is you go to irs.gov and you type non-grantor trust in the search bar. Okay. Or you call your CPA or a tax professional or an attorney, and you have them break that down for you. Okay. All right. So that is how that works. Have I thoroughly answered that question? Thoroughly. All right. Is there another question on that, or should I move on? Let me give you guys a moment to type the question if there's a question on that, and if there isn't, then I shall move on. Give me just a moment on that. Ooh, that is good. She made a really good latte today. Actually, it's a flat white, but quite good. I only do 1 cup of coffee a day. I used to be a coffee drinker, but I only do 1 cup of coffee per day now. Trying to get a little bit. I gotta cut 20 pounds as well. I gotta get in shape here, get back in shape. This 22-month-old don't care. he don't want no excuses. He don't care if you're tired or not. You better play with him. I digress, though. I don't see any questions on that. I don't see any questions popping up in the chat. So if you're typing a question now, hit enter. I'll give you the time to like finish or put a 1 in the chat, and I'll give you the time to write the question. If not, I'm going to move on. Okay, cool. I'll wait for your question. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. You said something about not being thirsty? Is this a real question? Are you like trolling me? Not being the trustee. Okay. All right. Yes. So it's you can't. Essentially, you cannot be a non-grantor and the trustee, right? That's not going to drive. You could be the beneficiary, and it still be a non-grantor trust, right? But if you're the trustee, you control the trust, right? The test associated with non-grantorship is how much of the trust do you like control, like how much do you have your fingers in, right? The less control you have, the more non-grantor it is, right? You may have heard the colloquial terminology blind trust, right? Those would typically be considered non-grantor as well, right? So that's why there's no tax filings. If you can show you don't control the trust, then what are you filing, right? So there's no filing requirements until a distribution is made from the trust to that U.S. citizen, and then that U.S. citizen would indicate that distribution on their tax return for that year, right? Whereas if it's a grantor trust, then that the grantor of the trust is responsible for all the trust's tax filings, no matter where the trust is. That becomes a problem, right? Because obviously the trust is responsible for its own tax situation, right? But the trust is not an American trust. So the trust doesn't have an American tax situation. The trust will do all its tax filings in its jurisdiction. The issue with the way America does taxes and the whole grantor non-grantor thing is that if you're an American and you control the trust under American law, it's now part of your tax obligation personally, right? So you have to do all of these filings on your side, even though the trust is not an American, right? So that's the difference. Because you can control it, there's all this tax stuff that opens up. There's FBAR, there's FinCEN, there's I can't remember the IRS form, so I don't want to say the wrong numbers, but there's 3 or 4 IRS forms that have to be filled out and attached to it's a nightmare, right? But if you just do a non-grantor trust, all that goes away. You don't have to do any of that, right? So for most people, you do not want to be the trustee. You can be the beneficiary, but you do not want to be the trustee. Okay. The most straightforward, absolute, no question, straightforward non-grantor trust situation is when grandparents create a trust for grandkids. So they're not beneficiary because it's not for them at all. They're not trustee because there's a corporate trustee in place. They have absolutely nothing to do with the trust, and the trust is for the grandkids. A classic example of a non-grantor trust, right? So those are, the easiest situation setups when it's somebody, even parents. There are a lot of parents that, like, we had a really young couple, really smart young couple looking to build generational wealth for their family. They did a family constitution workshop, and then they created their family trust. It does not benefit them in any way, shape, or form. They are not the beneficiaries. They are not the trustees. And it's not even for their kids, it's for their grandkids, right? So that trust is slated to have something like $10 million in it by the time their grandkids, they haven't even had children yet, right? So we're talking about this thing, excuse me, is compounding for the next, 40 years? If they have a child today, it's 21 years until that child is 21, right? And then if that child has a child around the same time as they have children, which is kind of typical, right? Like if your parents, you've seen that you had your kids at 20, and magically your kids have kids around 20, right? So we've also seen the negative the negative aspects. You have a kid at 14, and your 14-year-old says, "Mom, I'm pregnant," right? It happens. So so that's kind of par for the course. And so if they have their kids, now, if it happens right now, until their kids are 21, that's 21 years, and then until their kids have kids and are 21, there's another 21 years. But they didn't have kids at 21, right? They're having kids at like 25, right? So you got 21 years and 21 years, that's 42 years, but there's still like a 5-year buffer in there, and between the maturity of getting married and having kids again, right? And so you're talking about 50 years of compounding, 45, 50, somewhere in that neighborhood of compounding, right? And so they have a 30-year bond, right? 30 is the max in Kenya. So they have a 30-year bond that is going to be paying out twice a month for the next 30 years. All right. So they're not making payments from America. That if American assets are coming into the trust on a regular basis, that can be a problem as well. Right. And so there's no American assets coming into that trust. They're American. The trust is funding itself locally through that bond for the next 30 years. And that money is compounding for the next 30 years. They will have over $10 million for their grandkids and without paying anything. Again, remember, they're not making payments. It's not like a 401k. They're not paying into this. They've made one lump sum payment. They bought this bond. It has a fixed interest rate. I think the interest rate is 15.5%. So they're making 15.5% annually guaranteed on this bond directly into the trust every year. And then the corporate trustee is taking that 15.5% and investing it a little in real estate, a little bit in the S&P 500, a little bit in this, a little bit in that, and then they're getting, higher returns. The ones that they invested in, if memory serves me right, they have Oak Special Fund that did a 22% ROI last year, so they got 22% on that. They did Mansa X, that's another 20% ROI that they're getting on that. They did, what's it called, ArvoCap. They did AverCap, that was 60% ROI. I should have done that one. I didn't. I missed out on that. But that was 60% ROI. Look it up, right? So ArvoCap paid out 60%. What else? They did, what was it? Is it Kush Wealth Fund or what? That was another 22%. So they have all these additional investments going on that are coming from the base investment, which is the 30-year bond, right? So their grandkids are going to be multimillionaires. Now comes the hard part, which this is not a live on that. We did a hard part live yesterday, but now comes the hard part, which is the education. The money is ridiculously easy. As soon as you learn how compounding works, if you're not selfish and you're willing to put something away for your kids that you're not going to benefit from, the money's easy. It's ridiculously easy. It's so easy that it's infuriating once you learn how compounding works, that all of your peers and your parents haven't done it, but you don't know what you don't know, right? So the money is stupid easy. It's the education and the financial literacy to keep the money that's difficult. All right. Can I do this in Tanzania? You mean, can you do it from Tanzania or in Tanzania? Like, what do you mean? Like, do you mean, like, is there a Tanzanian version of this? Or do you mean, like, you're Tanzanian, but you want to invest in the Kenya market? Like, what are you saying? Is there a Tanzania? I don't know. I don't know. Tanzania has quite a few reforms happening right now. So um, they barred foreigners from certain business sectors and stuff like that. And so what's odd is that in the East African community, like for example, Kenya just did a thing where it barred foreign doctors, right? So they barred foreign doctors. They're not going to renew the foreign doctors' licenses, but they're part of the East African community. So they made a caveat in the rule that if you're East African, which includes Tanzania, it doesn't apply to you. It's a very simple thing to do, to say, listen, and I'm American, so it would still apply to me, right? So it's not like it benefits me, but it's a very simple thing to say, hey, listen, we're part of this East African thing. We made an agreement. We're going to honor our agreement. So if you're East African, it's fine. It doesn't apply to you. That doesn't really happen in Tanzania, right? So they did this thing. They said no foreigners, and it does apply to Kenyans, and it does apply to other East Africans, which is like whatever, right? So it's a different, ecosystem down there, and they're doing weird things. And so I don't know if you can do the same thing, or if it's even safe to attempt to do the same thing there. I do know that in other countries, like we've had a bunch of interest about Nigeria, you can't directly engage with the Central Bank of Nigeria, right? So you can't do it the same way there, and you don't get the same benefit there because there has to be a broker in between. So you're paying brokerage fees, right? Whereas here you wouldn't be paying brokerage fees because there's not anybody in between you, right? So you're just doing your project, and you're just rolling into your project without having to pay anything to anyone, right? So it's different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction to jurisdiction. It's different. Now, can you be in these other jurisdictions and deal with Kenya? Yes, that you can do, right? But if you're asking for like your local equivalent to what I'm talking about, it may not exist. It may not be allowed. It may not be as cost effective. One of the other things that happens is we get a lot of people that will relocate and just do a bond ladder. And when they do a bond ladder, they don't have to work anymore. Like they can just quit their job, live off the bond ladder for the next 10 years because the government is sending them a check every single month, right? You might be able to bond ladder something in Nigeria because of all those extra fees and because of the difference in the cost of living. The money won't support you. Like it'll help, it's still money, right? But you can't just quit your job and just live off of the bond ladder, even though the ROI is sometimes higher, right? So you'll look at like, the Kenyan bond and it'll say, all right, you're getting 17%. And you might look at like a Nigerian bond and it'll say, all right, you're getting 22%. But the cost of living eats that up. And then that 22% is gross. So after, you deal with the brokers and have to pay whoever you have to pay and all of that stuff, now maybe you have an effective 13%, right? So those are the kinds of things that you have to look at to figure out how it's going to work wherever you are and whether it's worth it, to try and replicate this wherever you are. Like it absolutely doesn't work in the United States because the United States is not a tier 2 country, it's a tier 1 country. So that's another thing. Like what tier country are you dealing with, right? Like Kenya's a tier 2 country, Tanzania is a tier 3 country. So it's different, right? And so the sweet spot is tier 2 approaching tier 1, right? And which is exactly where Kenya is right now, right? So like hallmarks of that are intense kind of internal development. So like right now, Kenya's building a nuclear power plant. They're the only ones in East Africa doing that, right? Because they're the only ones at that tier level to even approach a project like that, right? And so because of that, how are they going to do it? They're going to pull money from all over the place, right? They're going to pull money from taxes. They're going to pull money from bonds, which is when you're doing bonds, it's the government asking the citizenry to act as a bank. That they're asking the citizenry, or not even necessarily the citizenry, but the people, because you don't have to be a citizen to buy the bond. So they're asking the people to give them a loan. The coupon payment is the interest on the loan. It's the government paying you interest. That's what a bond is, right? So they're going to take loans from the people. That's called a bond, right? They're going to take loans from international, monetary organizations like the IMF and all of that. They're going to sell, debt, right? They're going to do all of those things, right? So when that's happening, that's when those rates go up. You get those extraordinary, okay, I'm getting 16% guaranteed for the next 30 years because I'm, helping with this development project or whatever. But if there's not that much development going on, or if you're fully developed, then those rates aren't going to be the same, right? So the U.S., if you get a U.S. Treasury bond, you're talking about getting like 4%, 5%, 6% at best, right? Whereas if you get a Kenyan treasury bond, then you're talking about, 14%, 15%. 12 has been the lowest that we've seen in recent years. So, very, very, very big difference. And that's where like your due diligence comes into play and whatever to make sure that you're in the right countries doing the right things. All right, but good question. Yeah, yeah, also, yeah. It's the same thing. What the so there was a recent, I think it's a Supreme Court a ruling in Tanzania that also blocked non-citizens from being able to inherit land. Sounds like halfway decent on the face of it, right? The issue becomes the citizenship issue in Tanzania, right? So let's say you're a 100% Tanzanian, born and raised, right? You live in, I don't know, Arusha or something, right? And your kid wins the diversity visa lottery, or your kid is brilliant, wants to go to Harvard, and Harvard sponsors them, right? Like Harvard gives them a full scholarship and does a student visa for them. They go to Harvard, they're offered a job at Google, right? Starting salary $500,000 a year. They're a brilliant coder, right? They take the job, right? So what ends up happening? They become an American, right? They get a green card. They hold the green card for 7 years. They become an American. As far as America is concerned, they're a dual citizen. But Tanzania doesn't allow dual citizenship. So as far as Tanzania is concerned, they have given up their Tanzanian citizenship. Okay? So now, what this court ruling actually means is that they can't inherit their father's land. 100% Tanzanian, born and bred, right? But they went out, they got opportunities somewhere, blah, 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 blah. Now they, have a dual citizenship situation, but since Tanzania will not allow it, so who gets their father's land? The government. Now the government takes your family's land because you got a job at Google, right? So it just depends on where you are. So yeah, and that's why like generational wealth trust funds, you know, aren't viable everywhere. Like we would never use that jurisdiction for a generational wealth trust fund because it would stop, right? Like you can only be a Tanzanian. You can't get a passport portfolio. You can't go out there and do other things and actually build an actual international, family like a Rothschilds or a Rockefeller or, a De Beers or like a serious international family because the government restricts your growth and gives nothing in return. Like, so Singapore does the same thing, but Singapore gives you an incredible amount of incentives for giving up your other citizenships and becoming Singaporean, right? So you get all kinds of tax incentives, you get all kinds of monetary incentives, you get a ton of incentives for doing that. There are none, right? In the country that you're talking about. So that's why it's like some of these things just don't work in certain countries because of the way those countries kind of carry themselves. So, it is what it is. And that's fine. Not every country needs to be, accessible in that way or whatever. You know what I mean? It's just that in that country it doesn't make sense. And until something changes with the way that they present themselves globally, it's not going to make sense. I mean, if it's something that you want to do, I guess, but you can have a trust in any country, right? Good morning, Rose. So, even though you're in that country, you're not necessarily stuck. The problem is that if you're doing international business and you're trying to create a dynastic family that's going to now have assets around the world, you're probably going to have to give up your homeland because of them, because they're the ones who give you the ultimatum. So, they're the ones saying, if you engage anywhere else, then you give us up. So it's kind of like a bad relationship. When they're the ones giving you the ultimatum, they should lose, right? And so that's what typically ends up happening. So they're actually creating their own brain drain, right? So it's not the same problem that it is in a lot of the other African countries. All right. Anything else on that? Hey Rose, you got a question? Okay. Yeah, yeah, no, 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 yeah. I mean, we do see it a lot. Um, I live really, really close to Tanzania, so I do see it a lot. But there are ways around it. Just it sucks that eventually you probably won't be Tanzanian anymore. Am I a Kenyan? Almost. I will be very, very soon. I'm in the last phase of naturalization, so I'll be a Kenyan in maybe a month. No, actually, that's a great question. No, we don't have any other jurisdictions currently where this coupon laddering method is effective enough for you to quit your job after you do it. So, and it only works here when you own a house and you don't live in Nairobi, right? Nairobi's more expensive, right? So a lot of our folks that are do it, we build them a house, typically near the beach in Diani, and then the coupon payments from the bonds are actually enough to cover their entire lifestyle. Great, nice to meet you here. Definitely, definitely. Nice to meet you too. Right, it has to be a perfect blend of a high enough coupon rate, a low enough cost of living, and still a modern lifestyle that is equal to what you're leaving behind, right? Um, and so most of our relocation clients are American. Next highest group are Brits, and the third highest group are Canadians. So they want whatever standard they're used to, right? And so this is just the perfect storm of that. We can get you the exact same lifestyle that you had, wherever you're coming from. Um, and then after, the house is built and you're not paying rent and all of that, then you're getting somewhere in the neighborhood of between 60 and like 80,000 a month from the bond ladder. So that covers everything once you don't have to pay rent, right? Now, if you're in Nairobi paying rent in Nairobi, you might be paying 120,000 a month just for rent, right? So then now, if you're getting 60 or 70,000 a month, obviously that's not covering, whatever. So if you have to be in the city, then it just helps. It doesn't actually allow you to be covered completely. But if you're not in the city, um, and you're in a place that still has great private hospitals and all that type of stuff, so you're covered from kind of every angle, then yeah, it'll completely cover you. So we have quite a few people who, like, they didn't have remote jobs, they didn't have stuff like that, so they were like, how am I going to survive over there? And then the bond ladder was the answer for them, because now they have guaranteed money, and that bond ladder, it's going to pay them for like the next 10 years, right? Some of them even have like 20, 25 years of this guaranteed money coming in. So your max is 30, but it's difficult that every rung, like every bond on the ladder is going to be a 30-year bond. Like that's typically not going to happen. So the max amount of time you can have on a bond is 30 years, but like you're going to average out somewhere around like 10 or 15 years of time that you're getting money every single month. So that's how that works. I saw something on the TikTok side. All right. Can I get a job there? Can you get a job where? With us, we're not hiring right now. However, we will be hiring in like a month. So just keep your eye on this channel. How do you manage the 30% foreign tax on property? It depends on what country you're coming from, right? I'm not sure which country has a 30% foreign tax on property. So I'm not exactly certain what you're talking about. But there are ways to manage it, right? Maybe you don't own the property. Maybe your trust owns the property, and maybe you're a beneficiary of the trust, right? So then, is it foreign owned? Then is the trust foreign? Is it a Kenyan trust? Is the trust recognized as its own entity and its own person when it's registered under BRS? Does that make it a Kenyan citizen? So it just depends. It depends on what you're doing. So if you've already purchased and you're looking at that tax rate, then unfortunately you must have purchased without going through a professional that had a strategy like the one I just outlined for you, right? None of our clients own property directly. So you got to be working with a professional that understands the legal. We own a law firm in Mombasa, right? So you got to be working with a professional that understands the legal strategies that can set things up in a proper way to avoid, especially American taxation, right? So earlier on in this live, we were talking about a grantor trust versus a non-grantor trust under the IRS definition in America, right? And so definitely it's worth going to irs.gov and typing into that little search bar non-grantor trust, and seeing what a professional would have probably told you, before you purchased that property, which would have gotten you completely out of the tax situation that you're in now. But now it would take a look at your overall situation to figure out how to correct this, because it's going to be some sort of movement that's necessary to correct it. And that movement might activate a taxable event because it might look like a sale, right? So whatever movement needs to happen now to kind of protect you from that moving forward is something that you're going to have to get with a specialist. If not us, just find a legitimate specialist that knows what they're talking about, who can set that up for you. But it's not going to be cheap. Let me just start there, because a lot of people think they can fix this kind of stuff for nothing, especially since you're already in. It's always, let me say this to all of you live streams that are up right now, right? So Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. Let me say it to everybody. Planning always wins, and it's always more cost effective 100% of the time. When you have to fix things, it's expensive, right? Planning always wins, and you don't know what you don't know. So don't rely on ChatGPT and Google. Get yourself a professional, and then make sure, like, how do I know they're really a professional? How do I know they're really a specialist? How do I da 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 da? Make sure it's in the contract, right? Make sure that in the contract you're indemnified of any kind of like fines that could result, and that it's on them if anything funky happens. And if they got a problem signing that indemnification, they're not a specialist, because now they're afraid. Now they're working on TikTok information or GPT information, and you just caught them, because now they're afraid to take responsibility for anything that goes wrong. If they're a true specialist and they're setting you up in the proper formation, they know no one can touch you, right? So it's nothing for us to sign that indemnification and say, all right, as long as you don't do what we told you not to do, right? The IRS can't touch you. So we'll sign that if something comes from the IRS, it's on us and we got to pay it. Because as long as you don't do what we told you not to do, it's impossible, because we know what we're talking about and we're specialists. We got no problem signing that indemnification, right? Now, if you step out of lane and you do something we told you not to do, you violated the indemnification. So then it's on you, right? But as long as you do what we tell you to do, you're good. We have no problem signing that indemnification. So all specialists have no problem with that, because they actually know what they're talking about, right? So that's the way you figure it out. If they're not willing to indemnify you of anything going wrong, they're full of shit, and so be careful in that regard. But planning always wins, and not planning is always expensive, right? So people will do things, and they think they're saving themselves, and they're actually hurting themselves. So it happens all the time. It's it's human. Happened to me personally 15 years ago when I started and had the wrong mentality, and came with an American mentality and blah 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 blah. So it happens to us all. But I had to move out of a price. I had a price mentality, right? I was a price buyer from the United States. So everything was, hustler mentality. What's the cheapest? What's the cheapest? Where can I save money? Can I do it myself? I do it myself, right? And that was the mentality. You cannot go to another country, no matter what country that is. This is not a Kenyan thing, right? You cannot go to another country with a price buyer mentality, right? You have to go to another country with a value buyer mentality. It has to be, I need the greatest amount of value for the money that I spend, and that's going to put you into a range of working with specialists, right? You don't even necessarily want to work with professionals. That comes later. You like when you open a business, you can work with professionals. That's fine. You want specialists, right? And you want to be working with those specialists initially, and then get everything set up, and then you can downgrade to like a professional and just work with professionals moving forward from there. But that level of planning and getting the right people on your team is going to save you a ridiculous amount of money. All right. No. So a specialist is going to work with you until the completion of the target, right? So it's like a brain surgeon is a specialist, right? Your regular doctor is a professional, right? Your general physician is a professional. Your brain surgeon is a specialist, right? They don't just do a brain surgery on you and disappear, right? They're with you through rehab, they're with you through follow-ups, they're with you through all of that, right? So there's no such thing as a specialist that acts like a generalist and just does one thing for you and disappear, right? So that's a liar. That's not a specialist. All right. So like for us, we're with our people until they get dual citizenship, if that's their goal, right? We have some people that's not their goal. Their goal is permanent residency, right? So then we're with them until permanent residency, right? Because we're specialists. So we're there for the follow-up, and we're there for the rehab, and we're there for the, right? And all of those things are the things that, in this regard, are the things that lead you to, either your dual residency or your, permanent residency or whatever, moving forward from there. Or if you're doing short-term rentals, we have a lot of clients that never even come to Kenya, right? But they still need an investor permit in order to do that legally, right? And they still, need to have everything carved out to make sure that their tax situation is correct on the U.S. side, right? So, how are you going to do that? Right? We got plenty of folks that, they own Airbnbs here. They're doing it legally, and then when they move their profits to the United States, their profits are 100% tax exempt. How do you do that? Right? Right? So, it depends on the strategy. Right? If you don't know what you're doing, you're not going to be able to move your profits from your Kenyan company to your U.S. company tax exempt. Right? If you do know what you're doing, then you're gonna, use one of the strategies, right? Like the DRD, right? Dividend return deduction. Dividend under the IRS. Go to irs.gov. Type in dividend return deduction. Under the IRS code, if you do a dividend return deduction and you meet all those qualifications, which I'm not going to get into, but if you meet all the qualifications, your dividend return deduction is 100%. Go look it up yourself. Go look it up on irs.gov. Right? Go in there and type that into the search bar. Right? So your profits that you send as a dividend to your U.S. company, if you meet the right criteria, they are 100% U.S. tax deductible, right? So, again, it's just about having the people on your team who actually know what they're doing, or else you put yourself in a situation where you're paying crazy numbers, like whatever the young lady said she was paying, what was it, 35% or something like that, something crazy. That was in one tax. There's always more than one tax you got to pay. So, yeah, it happens. Yeah, DRD. But that's part of a strategy. Not everything works for everyone, all the time, right? So some people will qualify for DRD, some people will not, right? It's actually FDRD because there's a foreign dividend received deduction, right? So it's actually FDRD. So some people will qualify for that, some people won't. There's a full structure to that, right? How does one set up an appointment with your company? Yeah, you can. This is a wait, which all of our live streams are. You're on TikTok. Yeah, so this is a business account. So in the bio, there's a link. The only if you're watching on Fanbase, the Fanbase setup didn't allow for like a business account. So Fanbase is the only live stream where you're not seeing like links in the bio. Everyone else, there's a link in the bio. Go to the website, take the assessment. It's free. The assessment will tell you whether it even makes sense to work with us or not. Typically, and then one of our lawyers will reach out to you after the assessment, just do a follow up, and then you can decide whether you want to pay for a consultation or not, and go from there. But yeah. That's really all it takes. Yeah, no problem, no problem. Thanks for coming through, and I mean, and it sucks that you're in that situation. But yeah, reach out to us. We'll see if we can do something for you. There might need to be some restructuring on the U.S. side. I don't know. I don't know your situation. We have had that in the past though, where like your CPA on the U.S. side needs to restructure some things, and we've even run into like that person's not qualified because they don't know international taxes, right? Maybe they're really good at doing a tax return, but they're not like an international specialist. So we'll assist. We even have, I don't know if you're here or not, but we even have a enrolled agent who's a certified IRS enrolled agent, but he's in Nairobi physically, right? So we should be able to do something for you. No, he's not Kenyan. He's from Baltimore. He's from Baltimore. He's from the U.S. Is he Baltimore or Detroit? There's something in the back of my mind is ringing Detroit, but yeah, he's from the U.S. But he's a certified enrolled agent. Oh, and so enrolled agents are the only non-attorneys that can represent you before the IRS. So they're different than CPAs, but when the crap hits the fan, they're superior to CPAs. They're not necessarily superior to CPAs overall, but when you need somebody to go represent you to the IRS, they're superior to CPAs. We do have some CPAs that we like, but they're all JD CPAs, right? So a JD CPA is someone who went to law school and has a CPA. So they're tax attorneys. So they might cost a bit more than a regular CPA, but they're thorough. That's why we like them. So, we don't like leaving much up to chance, especially when you're like going to another country. You know what I mean? You don't want some surprise nonsense popping up, and then you're trying to deal with it from, the other side of the world, literally, right? So we try not to leave much up to chance. Ooh, what about state? Are we turning this into a tax live? I can't like give like actual tax advice because I'm not a CPA in the U.S. We do have Kenyan CPAs and all of that. We can give Kenyan tax advice as a firm. But what you did ask is a really, really good question, though, which is what about the state? And that the answer is the same as the question: what state? Right? So, what about the state? And it depends on what state you're in. Some states are a bit asinine with tax nexus, it's called, right? So it's colloquially called tax residency. So where are you a tax resident, right? Some states will argue that you're a tax resident of the state even when you don't live there. California is one of them, right? Sometimes New Jersey is another one, right? Where they will use kind of perfunctory evidence to indicate that you're still a resident of that state. One of the things that they'll use sometimes is your mailing address. Another thing that they'll use is your voter registration, right? Another thing that they'll use is like prior taxes and just like the fact that you didn't say to them, I'm not a resident anymore. and things of that nature, right? So sometimes, depending on the state, you may do your federal taxes, right? Because as an American citizen, you're taxed for having a passport. Doesn't matter where you live. You have to do a tax filing. You very rarely have to pay, right? If you listen to the internet, everybody makes $1 million, and a $500,000 is the new minimum wage, which is utter bullshit. If you go to the census, you'll see that the amount of people that make $100,000 is like 16% of people overall, right? And in my community, it's 6%, right? So somebody's lying, and it's not the statistics. And so when you're dealing with foreign earned income exclusion, right, which is something to go to IRS and look up again, irs.gov, and look up. The IRS says that, I think this year it's been adjusted for inflation, so I think it's 132,000 now, or 136,000, somewhere in there. But last year it was 130,000. Your first $130,000. Remember, only 16% of Americans make $100,000 a year. Your first $130,000 is excluded from taxable income. It's called the foreign earned income exclusion, right? So you have to file, but you don't necessarily have to pay, right? And so it's these kinds of things. So you'll do that filing or whatever. You won't have to pay federal income tax, but your income is still there, right? So you have the income exclusion. You're under 130,000, right? That's great. You're excluded federally, but are you excluded on the state level? If you have a state liability, and can they see the federal income tax? Yes, they can, right? So that's where sometimes they'll mess with you, and then you have to essentially prove, like, no, I'm not a tax resident of California, right? Because California doesn't tax you based on your passport; it taxes you based on your residency, which is what America should do. But I digress. So then you have to make that case, and it's a preponderance of the evidence, right? So it's all of the little tidbits of evidence combined. It's not a criminal. Are you guilty? Not guilty, right? It's, are you liable for the taxes or not liable for the taxes, right? Do you have a tax liability or not? And so there are a bunch of little things, like I don't renew my U.S. driver's license anymore. That's a part of the preponderance of the evidence. I have a Kenyan driver's license. I don't have a U.S. driver's license, right? I don't vote in state elections. I only vote in federal elections now because I don't have a state nexus, right? Now, you don't have to do that. You could take a state nexus in a state that has no income tax, right? So I could register an address in Delaware and get a Delaware driver's license, and so it just depends on. I'm an immigrant. I'm not an expat. For an expat, it would make sense to go to Delaware and get a Delaware license, or it would make sense to go to Nevada or Florida or some state that didn't have income tax, right? And make that your tax residence, because you don't have to pay taxes anyway, type of thing, right? Because expats are temporary. They're staying in a place temporarily. So when I lived in the Philippines, I was an expat because I knew I wasn't moving to the Philippines. When I lived in China, I was an expat because I knew I wasn't moving to China. I'm an immigrant here. I'm moving to Kenya and I'm becoming a Kenyan citizen, right? So now it's a different situation, right? So the way I handle it isn't necessarily the way that you would handle it as far as erasing your state tax residence. So like I don't have a voter registration in any state. I don't have an address in any state. I don't have a driver's license in any state. You know what I mean? So it's pretty easy for me to make my case of I don't owe any state in the United States anything, right? I have a blue passport, so I still got to make my federal, tax return filing, but I don't have any state tax residency in the United States of America, right? So it just depends. If you're, like I said, if you're an expat, you do something different. If you own a house that you're renting out in the United States, obviously you then have an address, unless you put that house in an LLC or in a trust or something, So it just depends on your personal circumstances, how you handle that situation, right? Without going into any kind of like crazy specific advice, because specific advice is not going to apply to you because I don't know your Really just depends on the state. And I don't know how all states act. I haven't had clients from every state, even in the decade and a half that I've been doing this, right? So, like, I don't know how, like, I've never had a client from South Dakota, right? It's never happened. I don't even think I've had a client from North Dakota, right? It's never happened, right? So there's just certain jurisdictions that I've never had to deal with, and may never deal with, you know what I mean? And so I don't know how those states react to people leaving. Worst state? Oh, it depends on the metric you're using. Cali's pretty bad as far as, proving to them that your tax residency has changed. For homeowners, Jersey is pretty bad because Jersey is weird. Like in Jersey, if you sell your house and don't buy another one, there's like a fine for that. So if you sell your house, you buy another house in Jersey, like you're cool. But if you leave Jersey, there's almost like a you've left the state like tax. It's weird. So you get fined, or there's a payment that has to be made for you selling a home in the state and not buying another one in the state. It's weird. But we've dealt with that a couple times with Jersey clients. We have quite a few Jersey clients. We've had a few that own homes, and when they sell their house, if they're not buying another house in Jersey, there's an additional fee at closing. It's very, very bizarre. So it just depends on the metric, right? It depends on how you're trying to rate who's the best and who's the worst. The best states, I mean, are typically the states with no income tax. So there's a few of those, right? So they don't care. Like you can actually maintain residency there because there's no income tax requirement. So they don't owe them a tax anyway, right? Those states are typically the best. Yeah, I mean, if I was going to reestablish an address in the United States, it would probably be in Delaware. No, 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 no. It's not a capital gains tax, Des, which, that's a separate thing. There's an actual, I'm trying to remember, let me see if I can look it up real quick. It blew my socks off the first time I saw it. All right, let's see. Uh, it is called a realty transfer fee. Um, let's see. Is that it? A state tax on the property value paid by the seller with the rate. No, hold on. An additional attorney fee. Uh, 40. Exit tax. Yes. So it's not the realty transfer fee. I apologize. It's the New Jersey exit tax. That up. If you're moving out of state, you might encounter the New Jersey exit tax, which isn't a new tax, but a mandatory payment. Um, uh, let's see. Ensure that New Jersey collects its share before you leave. So it's a very, very weird. It's a very weird type of situation. We've never encountered it with another state, but it's like if you sell your house in New Jersey and you buy another house somewhere else in New Jersey, you do not have to pay it. But it's like, oh, you're leaving the state. Oh, okay. Well, then pay to leave. Now, America, as a federal government, actually does a similar thing if you give up your citizenship. It used to be you could just walk into any consular officer and be like, I'm not an American anymore, and that was it. Like, you had to do little to nothing. Like, yes, they would make you sign so you didn't fight later or whatever, but technically, by the letter of the law, you could just tell any consular officer outside the United States, right? There's no consulate in the United States, right? So you already had to be outside the United States. You could tell any consular officer, like, I don't want to be American anymore, and that was the end of it. Then Eduardo Sovereign, who was one of the founders of Facebook, got a huge settlement because, he had claimed that Zuckerberg defrauded him out of ownership of Facebook. And so Facebook paid this huge settlement. And right before he got the settlement, he gave up his citizenship in Spain and then didn't pay a cent on that gigantic settlement, right? Like billions. So it's actually called the sovereign rule now. Like, he changed the law where now when you give up your citizenship, like, you have to pay a giant, like, exit tax. It's essentially a mini version of that, right? So very, very odd for Jersey folks. So what a lot of Jersey folks have done, if they're old enough and qualify, sometimes they'll do like reverse mortgages, which are really kind of sucky, but it works for certain people. And you can do a reverse mortgage, and depending on who you're doing it with, again, you got to read the fine print and all that. But sometimes you can still Airbnb the place. So there's that. You can definitely do like HEIs, which you can absolutely still Airbnb the place with an HEI, which an HEI is a private equity investment in they essentially buy like a share of your home, right? Like, they treat your home as though it's like a company, and they buy equity in the house. And so they pay you based on the future value of the house, and then you don't need to make a payment for like 15, 20 years, right? So you get a lump sum of cash, and you don't have to do anything for 20 years, and there's no interest, but then you pay back at the end of the 20 years, whatever the agreed rate is, or you let them take your house. So there's that. So there's a bunch of like options to like not sell. Sometimes it doesn't matter. Like, sometimes the house is worth enough that you just eat it and go from there. So, sometimes it doesn't matter. Can you have dual citizenship? It depends on what your other citizenship locations are, right? So like, I have 3 citizenships, and all of those countries are fine with that. So it just depends on what your citizenship, what the locations of all your other citizenships are. Some places will say, we don't recognize dual citizenship. That's better than you cannot have dual citizenship, right? So like, America, yeah, you can have as many citizenships as you want. So like, China doesn't recognize it. And so, but that doesn't mean you can't have it. That just means while you're in China, you're Chinese, right? If you have that setup, doesn't mean that you can't actually have 20 other passports. It just means that they don't care about that when you're in China, right? But places like Tanzania, they're the kind of place that's like, no, 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 no. You have to give up every other passport to get ours. That's a different situation. And so that should only be done very strategically. So we have, Trump is trying to stop that. I have heard that. I don't know of any legislation though that's on the Senate floor or House floor that actually attempts to do that. But I've heard the talk. When you're looking at building generational wealth and you're looking at having passport portfolios as part of the wealth that you're passing on, there are times when you do turn someone into a sacrificial lamb, and they have to give up all of the passports that you've earned as a family in order to benefit the family in an extreme way. That doesn't happen in Tanzania, but it does happen in Singapore, right? So typically our generational wealth clients who get to that level where they now need what's called a family office, they find a female member of the family, and they make that female member of the family the family office sacrificial. They typically get incentives, right? So they get more money from the family trust than like the other people do, and they run the family office. So they're getting a salary for running the family office. They would end up giving up all of the citizenships that the family has, and take on Singaporean citizenship. And it's always a female, right? The reason for that is there's mandatory military service in Singapore. So if you make a male this you'll end up delaying the functionality of your family office, which the family office makes the money for the family, right? So you'll end up delaying the functionality of the family office because that man will now have to go to the army for the next 2 years or whatever to do their mandatory service. Women are exempt. So it's always a woman, and then that woman gives up all of her citizenships. Like I have three, my son was born with four, right? So if you're doing actual family planning, every time a child is born, you gain access to a new passport, right? And so, and they're strategic passports that give you access to capital markets that you can't access unless you're a citizen, right? And so then when you get to that point where it's okay, now we're going to set up our family office, which is essentially like a Wall Street broker that only works for you. They only make money for you. That's what a family office is. Singapore gives you incredible incentives, right, to open your family office there. And so, you know, eventually the person who's running that office will become a Singaporean. Like we said, it's typically always a woman, and they will give up all those other passports that they had access to in order to become a Singaporean passport holder, right? And so in that situation, it's worth it. So some countries don't make sense, you know, that they're telling you to give up your citizenship. Other countries, it makes a lot of sense. And so it just depends. It depends on what that family is doing. Not every family is building multi-generational wealth internationally, right? So not every family is even focused on that. But if you're going to be that kind of high level family that's doing something like that, you'll get to a point where it might make sense to actually take one person and they would actually give up, you know, those passports. And like I said, you compensate them for it. You compensate them really, really well for it, and then they run, you know, the family office. So yeah, that's essentially how that works. I think I saw something pop up while I was doing that. Da-da-da-da-da. Is it hard to get remote worker visa in Kenya? It's not hard. It's complicated, and so you definitely need a professional. Our law firm processed the first two ever in the country. It's brand new. It only came out last year, right? But it's complicated because you need permission from your country. Some countries don't even have a mechanism to do that. So like we had a Canadian that was trying to do it, and the Canadian government was like, we don't even know what you're talking about. We have no such form. We're not giving you, you know, anything like that because there's no precedent by which we would give it. Go talk to the they call it the High Commission, not the embassy, but go talk to, you know, the High Commission in Kenya and see, like, you know what I mean. So it's complicated because it's new and its requirements don't necessarily align with international standards yet. So you definitely need a professional. I wouldn't try to do it on your own. I've been coming back and forth for like 13 years. I've been coming back and forth for 13 years. Um, and it takes 7 years to get citizenship, and I'll have citizenship in like a month. So as far as living here full time, that we've you know, been here for the better part of the 7 years since we started. But I used to come and go, come and go, come and go, like spend 3 months and leave, spend 6 months and leave, you know, that type of thing. Then I got married, and we just had a kid almost 2 years ago. And so, but yeah, I'm here permanently now. And even for me, like I was talking before about like planning always wins. I didn't plan it out properly because I didn't realize I wanted to do it initially, right? So it is what it is, right? You don't know what you don't know. But I could have been a citizenship. I could have had citizenship 7 years ago, you know, if I would have planned it. Well, 5 years ago, if I would have planned it out properly, right? So it's almost like a wasted 5 years, right? So again, planning is key, right? And the way you do that is you do it from your goals backwards, right? Like a lot of people are like, oh my God, how can I make a plan to move to a place I ain't never been to, or I ain't never seen, or I never visited, or I never da, 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 da. If your job called you right now and said, we're going to pay you double your salary, but you need to move to Milwaukee, to our branch in Milwaukee, and run that branch. You ain't never been to Milwaukee before. I bet you're going to go though, right? Because your end goal at your job is to make more money, right? So you're working from your end goal backwards, right? And that's how you do it. That's how you pick the right country, right? Because maybe Kenya's not even right for you, right? But that's how you pick the right country. That's how you pick the right strategy. If you start from your end goal and move backwards, that's how you're able to identify the places and the things that you want and the people that you want to work with, even without visiting, even without doing any of that stuff. It ends up being the same thing as your job calling you, and we're going to move you to East Texas, but we're going to pay you 50% more. And you're going to take over, you're going to be the manager of our spot in East Texas. You go. Right? You don't say, well, I've never been to East Texas. I got to fly there once or twice and figure it out. No, because it aligns with your end goal, right? So we all kind of know this. We're just not framing our vision the right way in order to come to that conclusion. We're assuming it's a different thing. It's really not, right? The trepidation comes from the lack of planning. Right? That's where the trepidation is coming from. But if you start at your end goal, like, all right, this is success. If I have this, that is my vision of success. Now let's move backward. What needs to be in place for me to get that? What does the government need to look like in the country that I'm going to? What's the company or the country's infrastructure need to be like? What do the hospitals need to be like? What does technology need to be like? How do transactions and financial transactions need to work? What opportunities need to be available to me for working or for business ownership or for investment? All of that stuff leads up to your end goal. And if you can get that down, and then now you're doing your due diligence with purpose, and you identify, okay, this is the place that has all the things I need. That's all I need to know, right? I don't need to go there for the hedonism or anything like that. All I need to know is that everything I need to be successful is in place and accessible to me. Now I found the place for me to go, right? There are way too many people, especially with this African relocation thing, that are making 100% emotional. I took a DNA test, so I'm going over here because that's where the DNA says I'm from. All this nonsense that is not rooted in anything that can actually benefit your life. We see this all the time. And the issue, the thing with us and the issues we see come from the fact that we own a law firm. A lot of these like relocation, consultants and all that other nonsense, they take your money, do one thing for you and relocate you and disappear. Like they're not there anymore, right? We get to see what happens when immigration deports somebody because we have a law firm that goes and defends them. We get to see what happens when someone gets arrested for, not having the right paperwork together, right? And so they think that they, falsified an immigration, process or something to that effect. We get to see all the fallout from all the nonsense because we end up going to court and representing these people and protecting them, right? Where very few other firms, regardless of the country you're dealing with, are actual law firms or actually own a law firm. So they don't get to see what's going on, on the back end of, the mistakes that people are making. So that's why we're very kind of matter of fact about real due diligence and like getting things done the right way, because we see and typically what happens is it looks like you're winning at first because they don't care about small fries, right? So you can be doing something completely the wrong way. These quote unquote consultants, it can look like they've delivered exactly what they said they were going to deliver to you. And 7 years down the line, when you've amassed some wealth and you own some property and you have some assets, that's when the government comes in because now there's something to seize. And they've been watching you the entire time, right? So that's when they show up and they're like, oh, cool, you got a significant amount of money in the bank account. We'll take that. You own a really nice property, beachfront property, all kind. We'll take that too. And you'll do 10 years in our prison, and then we'll kick you out and send you back to the country you came from. Right? So these are the types of things that, these folks that are like chat GPT consultants have no idea are going on because they're not on the back end of the legal side of things, right? And so it just makes all the sense in the world to not treat this like a game, right? You treat this thing very seriously. You hire serious people. You make sure that you can see their credentials and all of that. Kenya's really cool with that. Kenya actually has a system that's completely free where you can look up the lawyers. And you don't just get to see that they are actually lawyers, you get to see what kind of law they do, right? Because we've had people that, like, it'll be somebody who does accidental injury law, right? Has nothing to do with immigration, nothing to do with real estate, nothing to do with any of that, and you call them because they're a law firm. Hey, look, I'm trying to come to, Kenya. I'm confused about the way the permits work. Can you help me? Yes. Yes, I can. Let me charge you whatever I feel like charging you, and that's all that's in their head. They've never done that kind of law before, right? So when you go to the database in Kenya and you look up a lawyer, not only does it tell you if the lawyer is a lawyer, it tells you exactly what kind of law they do. Do they do immigration law? Our immigration specialist almost only does immigration law, right? So when you look it up, it's like 80% immigration law, right? We have a specialist that only does real estate. When you look her up, certain laws, certain profiles are going to make sense. When you look her up, it's going to say something like 60% real estate, 60% contract. Well, what do you need to buy real estate? You need a contract, right? So that makes sense, right? But if you go in there and it says personal injury, 90%, right? That's not the right lawyer for you. What's the website for the lawyer? It's lsk.ke. lsk.ke. It might be lsk.go, which stands for government. lsk.go.ke. It might be go.ke. But that's the website. And then you can look up any attorney. Right? Sometimes there are pictures there, sometimes it isn't. That's not a red flag or anything like that. As long as their name and their it's called a P number. So which is their lawyer number. As long as their name number and all that stuff comes up, they're good to go. Right? And the other thing is you could have a real lawyer who's not licensed to practice law that year. You're still screwed. So when you look them up, it'll say whether or not they've renewed their license for the year. They have to renew their license every year. So they can be a real lawyer, went to law school, passed the LSK, which is the equivalent of passing the bar, but for the year 2025, they didn't pay for their law license. So all the work for you that was done in 2025 is null and void. Right? So, you don't know what you don't know. Specialists matter, right? So if you're serious, make sure that you're doing your little bit of due diligence. It's not all of the due diligence that you got to do is free. LSK website's free, right? That don't cost you anything. Asking for an indemnification if it's appropriate is free. All those things are free. All the stuff that you got to do, figuring out your goals and your dreams and all that, and that's free. Sit down and figure it out. Figure out what success looks like to you, what you need to achieve that success. All of your base level due diligence is free, right? So there's really no reason for you not to do it. Why have you never heard of it before? Because there's a bunch of unscrupulous people online claiming that they're experts and claiming all of those things that you're not going to find in those databases. You can also look up lawsuits in Kenya for free. There's a database for that too, and you will see some of these relocation specialists on that list. You will not find us on that list. So all of that's free. You can look up all of that stuff for free. Who else in Kenya? We only recommend one other relocation outfit in Kenya, right? We don't compete with other professionals. We support, right? So they're not. We don't own them. They're not. Connected to us in that kind of way. But Traverse Culture is the only legitimate relocation outfit that we would recommend in Kenya. So there's us and there's them, and that's it that we'll put our name on. Does Traverse Culture specialize in? Yes, they specialize in medical tourism, right? We don't specialize in medical tourism at all, right? So they specialize in medical tourism. Definitely worth it to talk to them. If you're a veteran and you're service connected, definitely worth it to talk to them because they are able to do the veteran service connected connection thing and all of that. Super super professional, outfit. Like I said, doesn't profit us to say that at all, but we don't just bash people for the sake of bashing them or whatever. There, there's more than enough to go around. So, and they're a completely different vibe than us. So if you're not vibing with us, you might vibe with them, right? Remember, we're with you, especially if you're like a relocatee. We're with you for 7 years, right? It's not worth it for us to just take your money and be miserable with you in a bad relationship for the next 7 years, right? Think of it like a marriage, right? We're not just going to marry any old body and live with them for the next 7 years, right? So if there's not if there's some kind of personality conflict, that's okay, right? Find the person whose personality you connect with the most and go for that, because those little things matter when it's a 7 year journey to citizenship, right? When it's a 7 year journey to permanent residence, if you don't qualify for citizenship, but you still want to, not be renewing every 2 or 3 years, right? So definitely like choose the team that you jive with, but all specialists are going to give you that type of attention, right? Most of your people who are calling themselves consultants or whatever, they're not giving you that kind of attention. Once you get here, you're done with them, right? Or they're done with you, right? The people who are going to give you the full on attention are the specialists, and they're going to stay with you until you either become a dual citizen or you become a permanent resident. And that includes our clients who are like managing Airbnbs from America. Because if you own that business and you own that investor's permit for enough years, you can still get permanent residency even though you're not like here, right? Especially because you're hiring, Kenyans and creating jobs for Kenyans and all of that, right? So it's still possible to get one of those statuses. The main difference between permanent residency and citizenship is that permanent residency is like a green card. You're still not a citizen, but it's really hard to get rid of you, though. Again, kind of like a green card, right? Unless you voluntarily give it up, it's still pretty hard to just kick you out of the country. But the risk is there. If you're a citizen, you're a citizen. You're not going anywhere, and there's no restrictions on you. So those are the two differences. The main restrictions, non-citizens are voting. Can't vote because you're not a citizen. And freehold land ownership, right? So those are the two main restrictions. You guys have been rapid fire, giving me really good questions. Anything else? You guys got anything else for me? How long have we been here? YouTube says it's been 1 hour and 44 minutes. All right. Any other questions for me? I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover today and more. Yeah. No, thoroughly. I mean, yeah. I guess yeah, you have. I'm sure you've seen a couple of employees walk by. But yeah, I mean, we all. I feel like. Well, okay. Let me say it this way. Are my clients all hire local folks. So we all contribute to the economy in some way. Even my retirees, they hire a maid, they hire a gardener, sometimes they hire a driver. We even have folks that hire they have nurses, right? Because it was they couldn't afford to have the live-in nurse. They couldn't even afford to have the visiting nurse who only showed up for 8 hours a day in the U.S. and they were having whatever health problems they were having, but they can afford a nurse to live with them here, like a straight up registered legit nurse, not just like a nanny or something, right? So there's a lot of that. So I don't have a single client that has not hired at least one local. Most hire about three or four. The average is three or four, right? So yes, most of us hire local folks. Networks, but my clients, they're always hiring somebody. Sometimes if they those are the investor permit clients primarily, right? Because with the investor permit clients, um, even if they hire a foreigner, by law, they need to create a what do they call it? It's like an apprenticeship. They have a different name for it, but they need to create an apprenticeship and have a local learning that job. So essentially, when you do the investor permit and you hire the foreigner, you give them a work permit. What you're saying is there is no Kenyan who can do this, right? And that happens, depending on the speciality, that's necessary in the investor permit. So you may be in a situation where it's like, look, there's no Kenyan that knows how to do this. So then one of the requirements is, okay, fine, bring your foreigner on the work permit, but you now have to have an apprenticeship where you are teaching it to a Kenyan. Now, there's obvious exceptions, right? So let's say it's surgical, robotic surgery. There are no robotic surgical machines in Africa. Actually, there's said to be a part-time one in South Africa somewhere, but outside of that, there are no surgical robots in the entire continent. North, south, east, west, doesn't matter, right? So, how do you get a brain surgeon that can use a Da Vinci machine on a continent where there are no Da Vinci machines, right? So, in that situation, okay, fine, bring your Da Vinci operator from America or whatever, right? But it's still surgery. You can't have an apprentice learn brain surgery. They have to be a brain surgeon, right? So then that requirement of like, all right, well, you have to train someone in those like super specific scenarios where there's actual law on who's allowed to even be in that field. That's where there's sometimes waivers where it's like, well, look, we can't, you know what I mean? We can't even find the person to train per se, right? So it all depends on the specificity of the situation. But typically, most of those folks, even if they have to bring somebody else in, that person has to train a local to be able to do that job by law. Like they just have to do it. And then when their permit is up for renewal, there's going to be a flag on that permit. Like, didn't you train somebody who can do your job? Why are you still needed? Why do you still need to have a work permit? You can stay, but you got to change to an ordinary residency permit, maybe, right? Because why are you still needed to do that job if you've been training that person to replace you? Ordinary residency permits do not come with a work permit. So if you have an ordinary residency permit, you cannot work in Kenya. But ordinary residency permits do lead to dual citizenship. So if you can prove that you can take care of yourself in Kenya without taking a job from somebody else, then you will be eligible for citizenship in 7 years. So they protect their own. They protect their own. I got no problems with that. All right. Any other questions on any of that? My personal account. Let's see. I'll have to jump on from TikTok here, I guess. Then you guys will be able to follow my personal account. What have you heard about my personal account? It's interesting that you would ask that. What are you looking to see? Oh yeah, that's true. That's true, yeah. I do kind of drop little gems about um generational wealth. So yeah, on my personal account, that is true. I'll talk about like how we raise our kid, well, our kid, to be able to maintain generational wealth later and things of that nature. We get to see a lot. That is one good thing of having the firm and having the law firm in Mombasa and all of that stuff. We get to see the things that go wrong, right? And so because we get to see the things that go wrong, we kind of are in a like a crow's nest position where we're like, ooh, that didn't work out. Let's make sure we don't teach our kid that, and so yeah, you do get see some tidbits as to how we run the family on the personal account. So all right, I got you. Very rarely will you see that on the business account. So yeah, you can follow that account if you want. I got it up. He's sitting up there on the side. You can only see it on TikTok. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So if you wanna, I don't have like a personal account where I do that on Facebook or Instagram. Um, and then if you're following on Fanbase, they didn't have business accounts, so that shows as a personal account. But I don't do like personal posting there or anything like that. No, I don't have a personal YouTube either. Yeah, it's only TikTok. Just a personal TikTok. Can you explain why? What? Uh, as part of generational wealth? Yes. Okay. So money is super easy. All you got to do for money is let it compound, right? The reason why people have issues with money and generational wealth is because they're trying to be able to use the money, right? Generational wealth plans are not for you. They're for the next generation, right? Your generational wealth plan is not your personal wealth plan. They are two different plans, right? So what makes the money hard is people who are not being honest about generational wealth. They're trying to get personal wealth and call generational wealth. Those folks are the ones that end up having, you know, a hard time. Okay, so money is easy if you're being honest about it. So you can literally compound $1 into $1 million. It'll probably take you 300 years, right? Time is the other factor of the equation, but you can literally take $1 and compound it into, as long as you find, the right investment, you can compound that thing into $1 million from a dollar. You're never going to see that $1 million, right? And it's not smart to even attempt it, but mathematically it's possible, right? So I'm just trying to illustrate the ease part, right? Easy does not necessarily mean uncomplicated, right? Or the ease of doing something does not necessarily correlate to the simplicity of doing the thing, right? So it's simple to pull an engine out of the car. You disconnect everything attached to the engine and you lift it out of the car, right? But it's difficult. It's the engine's heavy. It's like 2 tons, right? You got 1,000 pound engine or something like that, or 2 tons is 4,000 pounds, whatever. When you're dealing with a truck engine or something like that, engines can be extraordinarily heavy, right? So there's a complexity there, even though in essence it's very simple to do, right? With compounding, You just have to be compounding at a percentage higher than inflation, essentially. And even if you're not, the dollar amount's still going to grow. The buying power might not be there with it, but it's still going to grow. So it's just time and sitting. Time and sitting. It's literally what Warren Buffett does. It's literally what Berkshire Hathaway does. It's just time. It's very, very easy. It's very, very simple. It's the easiest part of generational wealth. Okay? Put the money away for the next generation. Doesn't have to be a lot of money. We get a lot of people that like put $1,000 or a tax return, $3,000 or something like that, and never do it again. Never touch it again. They put that money there and they let it compound for the next 30 years. All right. And then when their kids get it, there's $1 million in there. There's $750,000 in there off of $3,000. Right. That's the easy part. The hard part is, do your kids have or your descendants or your beneficiaries, because some people, they do trust and their family actually isn't the beneficiary of the trust. So whatever. But do your beneficiaries have the financial literacy to maintain the trust? The statistics say 70% don't. 70%. Now, first of all, if you even created the trust and tried to start that kind of dynastic family, you're already in the minority. Most people are all talk and never take that step. So you're already in like the top maybe 20%, right? To even take that step and do that. So of those people who are already in the top 20%, 70% of their second generation destroy the trust because they don't have the education to maintain it, right? So now there's only 30% left. Of the 30% that's left, in the third generation, another 50% of them destroy the trust, right? And so once you get past that, you're home free. It's perpetual. You're never going to be out of money. You know what you're supposed to know, and you go from there. But how do you figure it out? If you didn't come from money, how do you learn what you're supposed to know, right? And so that's some of what he was talking about seeing on my personal page as we get into a little bit of that. And really, it's about capital, but people typically don't know what capital is, right? They think that capital is money, right? And capital is not money. Capital is the means to commerce, right? And so what ends up happening is you have all these different types of capital. You have cultural capital, right? Which is the most important capital for families that are getting into generational wealth. It's the most important capital when those children are born. So like between the ages of birth and maybe 6, cultural capital is number one. Then you have social capital, right? Then you have economic capital, which is what everybody thinks capital is. And then you have symbolic capital. So those 4 pillars of capital are the 4 pillars upon which actual generational wealth families, dynasty families, are built upon. Those are the pillars that will decide whether you're in the 70%, and by second generation, the generational wealth is burned, or you're in the 30%, right? That goes on from the second generation and moves on into perpetuity. Okay, so that is absolutely the hard part. The easy part is the money. The hard part is the dispositions and the education and the knowledge necessary to maintain the money. All right, so that's how that works. That's not like my focus on my personal, but yes, I do get into that quite a bit over there as we're going through it with our 22-month-old. And it's dramatic how different he is already. Utterly dramatic. So it's interesting to see how cultural capital really, really changes the outcome in kids, right? And it's cultural capital becomes innate. So it's really, 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 really super important because to the kids, it's natural. To the kids, it's quote unquote common sense. right? But to your first generation, it's not, because they're the first generation, which means that by definition they did not come up with that in the house. If someone's like, "Oh yeah, I'm the first generation, but in my house, my dad was a business person, and my mom, and we learned that," you're not the first generation. Because your dad was able to pass on that cultural capital. So your dad's the first generation, or your mom's the first generation. But if you're truly the first generation, then that means that you did not get that capital from anywhere. You're working off of mindset. So everything feels foreign to you, and everything has to be disciplined and conditioned for you. So you have to condition your new mindset. You have to condition the new frames that you see the world through. You have to learn, certain kind of basic knowledge to be able to build off of. But for your kids, they earn that through cultural capital. So they earn those dispositions based on the way you engaged with them. And it's really, really interesting to see when we do like a family constitution workshop. And so there's a family with, a newborn or a 1 year old, and then there's like a 14-year-old, right? Which is the next. So they had that that late kid, right? And then they learn the cultural capital through the family constitution workshops, and they start implementing it on the new kid. And the difference between the new baby and the 14-year-old who never got that is substantial, right? And so because we've been doing this for like a decade and a half, we've even gotten to see situations where the kid that was born before, this started, and the kid that, came on after this started, have completely different trajectories in life. Completely different. Like fact worker neurosurgeon. Completely different. And they're cognitively identical. Right? So the cultural capital, I can't stress enough how important that is for dynasty families, and to be able to create kids that can carry on the legacy, right? So that is absolutely 100% the hard part. 100% the hard part. It helps when you don't have to worry about money, right? That helps. Helps with the cultural capital, right? So our clients who do the bond ladder, and the bond ladder puts them in a position where they have this passive income all of a sudden that's taking care of all of their bills, and they don't have to work for money anymore, absolutely assists in cultural capital positions. Because one of the kind of enemies to cultural capital is that people who trade time, right, for money, are literally selling pieces of their lives for money. Some people sell it by the hour, some people sell it by the year, right? And they call those people salary employees, right? But it frames your worldview, right? Because now you hear a number, and in your mind it's, okay, that's 5 hours of my life that I have to sell in order to buy this PlayStation or something, right? Or these Jordans or whatever, right? And so that has a profound psychological impact that gets passed on to your kids. And again, to your kids, it's just common. It's not work. They're not working on changing their mind view or anything like that. That's just the way it is, and the frame that they're looking at the world through. So it does help when you can find a situation like like the bond laddering situation, where all of a sudden you're rich. Our definition of rich is that you have more money than passively, more money coming in passively than your monthly burn rate, right? So whatever you spend for the month, after you spend that thing, is your passive income higher than that? If your passive income, not your active income, is higher than that, you're rich. Okay? And so to instantaneously become rich and not have to worry about, active income in order to maintain your lifestyle, and to be able to kind of focus on your kids and all of that stuff, and show them that you don't need to sell your life for money, it's a fulcrum. It changes things so immensely. Now, if you don't have that, which obviously most people don't, you can still do it, right? It's still doable, of course. But that is definitely the most impactful way for you to start changing your viewpoint, and for you to start transmitting to your kids that same viewpoint that you're using, and the same framework that you're using, to create a new reality for them, quite frankly, right? That's the number one thing I wish for people is for them to be able to touch, bond laddering the way that we've been able to, where we don't need to concern ourselves with money anymore. It's not the first, second, or third thought that comes through our mind because there's a guaranteed income for decades, that's guaranteed to us by the government, right? And so, and it's interesting. There's an interesting mental framework that happens when the government owes you. You don't owe them, right? Because remember, a bond is the government taking a loan from you at a set interest rate, right? So when you're the banker for the government and the government owes you, right, that also creates a different psychological framework for you to move forward from. So, a lot of that is super duper important in building a generational wealth family, and that definitely is the hard part. Did I answer your question? Yeah, definitely. If you can, definitely do that. And here's the thing: most of our people who use the bond ladder don't even give up their other sources of income, right? There are a few who do. There are a few who like, I need to get out of here. I am, trying to leave the United States ASAP. They get the bond ladder, they get here, and we build them a house, and they see that they don't need to work. Like they test it for a month or two, of course. But when they see like, oh yeah, the money coming from the government covers everything and then some, they just quit. And I get it. Definitely get it. But the vast majority keep whatever little income they might be having, or they lean into their dreams. Like we had a guy who, and he had a great voice too, and he always wanted to be a voice actor. And I remember he was talking about the voice of Swan. What's the guy's name? Anyway, he's always wanted to be a voice actor, and that's what he did. He got his bond ladder together, all his basic income stuff was covered. In the house that we build people, like the special house that comes with the bond ladder, there's an office, there's a full size office. So, he had that office turned into his, voice studio, and he started doing voice acting, right? And it doesn't matter to him whether he gets hired or not. And so, guess what happened? He gets hired left and right. Because he doesn't approach, any of the stuff with desperation. Like he couldn't care less. He's in a financial state of F you, right? It doesn't matter. You give him a problem, F you. Like he doesn't care. And that gets him so many jobs. And we see that often. Like when you're no longer in a position of like desperation to get the job, it's crazy how many people just give you that job. And so yeah, now he's doing his dream. So there's a lot of that too. There's a lot of, what, I always wanted to be a writer. Well, now you can write your book because you don't have to worry about money anymore. You know what I mean? Or I always wanted to do this, or I always wanted to do that. We get a lot of that as well. And they do better when there's no stress of, where's the money coming from. So definitely something that, is viable now. It may not be viable in a year or 2 years when interest rates, recover essentially, and the government stops offering incredible interest rates for bonds. But if you find a way to do that wherever, right, whether it's our way, whether you find another way with another group that they have something viable, whatever it is, if you find a way to get money off your back, do it. All right, super impactful. All right. All right. Any other questions? We've been here for 2 hours and 10 minutes. Any other questions? Am I in Nairobi? No. I'm in Diani Beach, close to Mombasa. Hey Val, how are you? It'll probably be up on YouTube. I don't think, no, TikTok doesn't do like replays. So it'll probably be up on YouTube. Any other questions for today? You guys can see it on Facebook. All right. All right. I feel like I think you're right, but I feel like after 30 days, Facebook deletes it. So it's not like YouTube where it's like there forever. But I think you are right. I think you can go back and check it out on Facebook as well. All right. I think we're good. So I am certain it's 8:57. So I am certain my son is about to pop up and want some attention. So if there is nothing else, I'm gonna go do that. Do I ever go live? Not too much on my personal, not too much, but I think I will. I think I will just for like the type of stuff that the last guy asked. I think I'll start going live there and just showing some cultural capital stuff. Oh, that's a really hard. That's hard. So the most important thing from cultural capital, maybe academic disposition, right? That's really important. We act like it only assists in academics, but it doesn't. Am I willing to stand on that as the most important? Yeah, maybe. Maybe I am willing to stand on that. Academic disposition comes from the way we talk to our kids and not the way we talk to them. That's not right. Let me make that better. The way we answer and interact with them, right? So they engage. No kids within the stratosphere of norm, no, so no normative child, right, has an issue engaging with you initially. No normative child has an issue asking you questions initially. The way you respond to that creates disposition, not necessarily academic disposition, but disposition. Okay. And so you can create an academic disposition. And what that means is it means that the child feels validated in asking questions, feels that they deserve to have the answer, and feels that their learning partners, right, or their educators are learning partners, right, not just authority figures, right. So the way I've illustrated this in the past is you have two kids, same cognitive abilities, two different families. One family, they're not cognizant of cultural capital. Doesn't mean it's not there, unfortunately, but they're just not cognizant of it. All right. And so what ends up happening is, let's say the kid is sitting down for dinner, and in household A, maybe there's a single parent, maybe there's both parents, right? Let's assume there's both parents. And the parents work two full-time jobs and a part-time job to make ends meet, right? So they're very rarely there, and when they are there, they're tired, okay? But they love their kids. That's why they work so hard, okay? And there's Brussels sprouts on the plate. And the kid says, Mom, why do I have to eat Brussels sprouts? Right? Or, Dad, why do I have to eat Brussels sprouts? And the parent says, look, buddy, I don't know, but you got to eat it. All right, it's gonna make you strong. Just eat what's on your plate. Okay, you got to eat it, or you don't eat. I don't know what to tell you, right? But just eat what your mom made, or eat what I made you. Okay, loves their kids. They're frustrated. They're tired. You know, they don't have time to deal with the kid pushing back on eating vegetables. It's good for the kid. Eat your vegetables, are good for you. Okay? So that's one answer. That's household A. In household B, the parent engages with the question. So the parent says, "What do you think Brussels sprouts do for you, bud? What do you think they do for your body?" Right? Now there's going to be an answer. I don't know. They're yucky. All right, and then we start having a nutrition discussion about what vegetables do for your body, what these Brussels sprouts are doing. Green things have iron. Do you know what iron does for your body? Now a discussion happens. That parent isn't tired. That parent's not working 2 full-time jobs and a part-time job. They don't have the same frustrations. They don't love their kid more. They're just looking at the question that the kid asked through a different frame, all right, and have a different energy level. So their kid is building an academic disposition. The other kid is building an authority disposition, which is great if they're going to be a factory worker. Just do what the boss says. Keep your head down. Don't argue. Don't, do whatever you're told to do. Right? So it's great if that's their destiny. They're going to work on an assembly line. They're going to whatever. The other kid is learning that their questions matter, that they deserve thought out answers, and they deserve to go back and forth with the person who definitively has more knowledge than them because they're asking them the question, right? But they still have the ability to go back and forth with them and treat that person as a learning partner, right? That person is a partner in their education, which shows itself first in academics, which is why we call it an academic disposition. But I don't think I have to get into why it benefits you in more ways than that, right? So that frame also includes the parent being able to identify things that they sometimes fail to identify depending on their mindset, right? So, for example, my son just started throwing things. He'll throw anything. He'll throw an egg, he'll throw a glass, he'll throw a remote control, he'll throw the TV remote, he'll throw anything, right? So we go back to those two families. Family A, stop throwing things. You're going to break things. Stop breaking things, right? You just broke the glass. Why did you break the glass? Why? It goes back to what I said earlier about every time they spend money, they're spending hours of their life that they can never get back. You never get back the life that you spent. So you worked 40 hours a week, and what ended up happening, what ended up happening was that in that 40 hours a week, you get a certain rate. Maybe you get $10 an hour. So you make $400, dollars a week, right? Maybe that was your crystal, like your nice crystal, that you pour your wine in or whatever. Maybe it was $100. $100, that's 10 hours of your life that kid just smashed on the ground, right? 10 hours of your life. How much life do you have left, right? And so all of that emotion and all of that stuff wells from that subconscious understanding of what value is. It's literally your life. It's literally hours of your life that you're trading for this value, right? So you see it different versus, if my kid breaks a glass, I could care less, right? But the frame that I'm looking at that in, it's not just, well, the glass isn't valuable, so go ahead and destroy it. No, that's not what's happening because he's 22 months old, right? So what is happening? What is my mindset says is happening now, right? So what is happening is, from my perspective, is maybe this kid is exploring with gravity. Maybe this kid is exploring with physics. Maybe this kid is exploring, with projection, right? And so now we get into that, which is exactly what we did, right? And so now we get the bean bags, we get the soft things that he can throw, and he's already learned at 22 months the things that he shouldn't throw and the things that he should throw. So now he picks up this glass and he looks at it and he looks at me and he looks at the glass and he puts the glass down, right? And he goes and he gets the ball and he throws it, and he's fascinated by where the ball goes and how it bounces. He gets the other ball, the little knobbly ball that's not a bouncy ball, and he throws it, and it hits the ground, and it doesn't bounce. And he's fascinated. It's a science experiment. He's not trying to ruin your day and break the glasses and break the eggs, and he's learning about the environment around him, right? But that only happens because of the mindset that I have now and the freedom that I've received, from bond laddering and things of that nature. That's where that mindset has now been able to come from, right? If I had this kid 20 years ago, it would be shut up and eat what's on your plate. Stop throwing stuff. You just broke my controller. You know how much that costs? It would be the same thing. So it's not a matter of like some people being better and some people being, it's a matter of the mindset and the frame that you see the world through and what that, passes on to your child in the form of what we call cultural capital. It's not something I made up. This is sociology, right? So if you want to read more about it, look up, there's a famous French sociologist. His name is Pierre Bourdieu. Definitely look up the works of Pierre Bourdieu and the studies and all the research and the blah, 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 blah. And you'll learn a ton more about it. But that is the hard part of generational wealth, right? Me making sure that my family is run a certain way and that we're passing on certain things to my heirs, in the way that we engage and in the things that we nurture is super important. So now my kid goes to, it's not really a daycare, it's like a preschool, right? So he goes to that preschool. And again, he's 22 months old. And he has peers in the preschool that are 2.5, right? My kid he speaks 3 languages, right? So not fully, he's 22 months old, but he knows some words in Chinese only. He knows some words in Mandarin only. He knows some words in Cantonese only. He knows some words in Swahili only. He knows some words in English only. And he started speaking a bit of Meru. So actually, he's up to about 5 now, right? So Meru is his mother's tribal language. He doesn't know the entire languages. He's not fluent or anything like that in any of them. But because of the way that we engage, he has the freedom to figure things out. And he knows that they're different. He knows that grandma speaks Meru. You know what I mean? He can tell that different people are speaking different languages at different times. He goes to this preschool, and there are kids that are literally double his age that are goo goo gagaing, because in their house people are goo goo gagaing. Nobody goo goo gagas to my son. They talk to him the same way they would talk to any adult. That's another form of cultural capital, right? And again, we can see these differences in the development like night and day, right? So that's the hard part, learning those things, because you might not know that, right? And if you didn't know, how do you learn? Right? So it boils back down to professionals, right? Because even for us, I was able to find the work of Bourdieu, so whatever. But we had an outstanding governess here who also understood the work of Bourdieu. So there was a governess around my son that understood the family values, right, and was able to infuse those values even when we weren't around, right? So you can buy a professional. That's typically the answer to everything you don't know. You can hire a professional, right? So keep that in mind. Definitely veered off the topic, but it was a good question. So there's the answer. And yeah, that's it. All right. Anything else before I leave you? Any other questions? I do have the time, of course. So if you have the questions, I'm here to answer them. But if not, then I will take my leave. Any other questions? If you're writing a question right now, just hit enter, and I'll give you time to like finish whatever you didn't write. Or if you are looking something up to ask me something or whatever, just put a 1 in the chat, and I'll give you some time to get that out. If not, then I assume we're done for the day. All right, looks like we are good to go. All right, Freedom Family, thanks for hanging out with the Ask for Freedom Initiative today. Thanks for all the great questions. We had a good run of like an hour of you guys just hitting me with the questions. That was awesome. And I will be around same time tomorrow. I am going to stop doing these lives every day. And it's going to be more of like a show. So, which is probably going to pop up more on YouTube than anything else. I probably will go live on all these other streams while we're doing the show. So you might, be like behind the scenes type of situation. But obviously, I won't be answering your questions if I'm focused on the show host or whoever's asking me questions from the show side. So that's the format that we're kind of going to be switching to and going from there. So if you guys have any direct questions that you guys want to ask me, definitely this week, maybe next week, or is the time to do that. Beyond that, I think we'll get into that show. We'll be up country for a little while, and then we'll come back down to Deanne. So by the time we come back down to Deanne, we're going to start the show for sure. And while in up country, we might not be able to go live like that every day. So there might be a gap, and then the show starts. So that's what's coming in the next week or two. And so I look forward to that. Other than that, it was great having you guys as always. And I will see you same time tomorrow.